Hello and welcome to this video on the history of slavery in America. Slavery is a dark and painful chapter in American history, and it is important that we understand its origins, its impact, and its legacy. Slavery was first introduced to America in 1619, when a Dutch ship brought 20 African slaves to the colony of Virginia. Over the next 2 centuries, the number of slaves in America grew rapidly, and by the time of the American Revolution, slavery was well established in the southern colonies. Expansion of slavery in America. The number of slaves in America grew rapidly, shaping the country's history and economy. In the early years of slavery in America, the number of slaves was small and they were primarily used as household servants. However, the expansion of slavery in the South was driven by the need for cheap labor to work in the growing cotton and tobacco industries. As the demand for labor increased, the slave trade from Africa became more organized and profitable. Over the course of the 17th and 18th centuries, millions of African people were forcibly taken from their homes and brought to America as slaves. Slaves were treated as property, and they were subjected to brutal treatment and conditions. The Abolition Movement. The abolition movement was a social and political movement in the United States that aimed to end slavery and secure equal rights for African Americans. The movement began in the late 18th century and gained momentum in the 19th century, leading to the eventual abolition of slavery in the United States. One of the key strategies of the abolition movement was the use of abolitionist newspapers and journals to spread their message and mobilize public opinion. Despite these challenges, the abolition movement continued to gain momentum, and eventually played a significant role in the end of slavery in America. Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863, during the Civil War. It declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territories were to be set free. At the time the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, the Civil War had been raging for 2 years, and the Union was facing increasing pressure to address the issue of slavery. The proclamation was seen as a way to weaken the Confederacy and to rally support for the Union cause. The proclamation did not immediately free all slaves in America, and its impact was limited to Confederate-held territories. However, it sent a powerful message and inspired many African Americans to join the Union Army and fight for their freedom. 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified on December 6, 1865, officially abolishing slavery and involuntary servitude in the United States, except as a punishment for a crime. The amendment reads as follows: Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The 13th Amendment was the result of decades of struggle and sacrifice by the abolitionist movement, and it marked a turning point in American history. The amendment provided a constitutional guarantee of freedom for millions of African Americans who had been held in bondage for centuries. The amendment reminds us of the power of the Constitution to promote freedom and equality, and it inspires us to continue working towards a more just and equal society for all. Legacy of slavery. The legacy of slavery in America is complex and far-reaching, and its effects can still be felt today. Slavery was a brutal and dehumanizing institution that lasted in the United States for nearly 250 years, and its legacy has shaped American society in countless ways. These practices contributed to the systematic marginalization and oppression of African Americans and helped to maintain racial inequality in America for generations. Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement was a decades-long struggle for racial justice and equality that took place in the United States from the 1950s to the late 1960s. The movement was a response to the ongoing legacy of slavery and discrimination in America, and it sought to end segregation and discrimination against African Americans and other people of color. The civil rights movement was led by a diverse group of activists, including the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who became the movement's most recognizable figure. Despite these obstacles, the movement continued to make progress, and in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, which prohibited segregation in public places and discrimination in employment. The civil rights movement had a profound impact on American society, and it helped to lay the foundation for a more just and equal future for all. The movement inspired other movements for social justice, including the feminist movement and the LGBTQ rights movement, and it continues to inspire and inform contemporary struggles for racial justice and equality. Present-day effects. One of the most immediate and significant effects of slavery is the ongoing disparities in wealth, income, and educational attainment between African Americans and other groups in America. This disparity is largely due to the long-term effects of slavery, including the denial of opportunities for education, employment, and wealth accumulation. The legacy of slavery also continues to shape the criminal justice system in America, with disproportionate numbers of African Americans incarcerated and facing racial discrimination in the criminal justice system. Additionally, housing discrimination, which has its roots in slavery, continues to affect African Americans, with many facing unequal access to affordable and safe housing. The legacy of slavery reminds us that the struggle for racial justice and equality is ongoing, and that there is still much work to be done to overcome the lasting impacts of slavery and to build a more just and equal society for all. In conclusion, the legacy of slavery continues to shape American society, and its effects can still be felt today. It is important that we acknowledge and address the ongoing impacts of slavery, and work towards a more just and equal future for all. In conclusion, the legacy of slavery in America continues to shape our society and the lives of millions of people to this day. It is important that we acknowledge this history, and work towards a future in which all people are treated with dignity and equality. Through education, understanding, and a commitment to justice, we can continue the ongoing struggle for racial equality and build a better future for all. Thank you for watching.